All right, today we're going to be talking about being an active and critical reader and writing critique of text that we have read critically. Our agenda for this lecture today, first I'll talk about the source material, the readings for this lecture and for this unit. We'll define what an active and critical reader is and what a written critique is. We'll discuss how to determine purpose for a particular text, identify strategies for persuasive purposes, discuss logic and logical fallacies within an argument, and talk about writing a critique. There will also be a few notes about the second essay. This is the source information for the content of most of this lecture and for the excerpt, which is available on our course website. The textbook called Writing and Reading Across the Curriculum. We're taking this information from chapter 2 of that text. All right, so to begin, what is an active reader? A person who reads actively is a reader who is in dialogue with the text and or the writer. This is a person who sees reading as an engagement with the text. So an active reader makes notations while reading. So if they're reading from a paper copy or a textbook or an article of something like that, they're reading with pen or pencil in hand, making notations on the text. An active reader, if they are reading from a source online, is making notations on their own paper or on a Word document about their engagement with the text. An active reader reads a text more than once. Now, that being said, I'm not saying that an active reader has to spend hours and hours and hours to understand a text. This is not about a translation. In fact, if you're going through a text and you're translating more than, say, a dozen words, you are spending far too much time worrying about the meaning of individual words. An active reader is moving beyond the meaning of individual words and looking at the text as a whole. So what I would recommend is, for the first time you read, not looking up any words at all, but simply highlighting or circling or underlining a word that is particularly troubling or confusing to you, and then coming back to it later if you feel that it's really important for you to understand the meaning of that particular word. Maybe it's something that's used frequently in the text. If you think it's important to understand the meaning of that word, then yes, do go ahead and look it up. But don't spend too much time trying to translate the text into your native language. This is not going to help you understand the text as a whole, and it will just use up a lot of time. So that's what an active reader does. A critical reader asks, what does the author say in this article, and then looks at what that author does. In other words, the words they use is what the author says. What the author does, how do they use that language within the article? How do they transition from one topic to the next? What questions do they ask? What source material do they use? And then a critical reader examines why the author says and does this. Why does the author use these particular words? Why does he or she pose this particular question? What is their purpose for transitioning from this topic to the next? Is there a comparison being made? Those are the kinds of questions that a critical reader asks. Not taking the text at face value, not passively accepting all of the information, but constantly questioning the information that they're getting and their own understanding of it. So to move on, what is a written critique? After you've completed your critical reading of a text, and for our purposes we're talking about a reading text, a written critique is a formal written response to that text. So this helps you to evaluate the passage that you've read, and it helps you to deepen your own understanding and knowledge, and perhaps expand the knowledge and understanding of others who might be reading your critique. This also provides an opportunity for you to examine your own knowledge about a topic, the beliefs that you have about this topic, and assumptions that might underlie your beliefs that you might have been unaware of. So basically, a written critique is a way for you to further explore your understanding of a text in writing, so as a self-reflective activity. All right, now that we've defined what it means to be a critical active reader and what it means to write a critique, we need to move on to the different steps that we need to complete in order to make this process complete. So First of all, when we're engaging with a text, we need to think about what the author's purpose was. Why did they write this piece? Generally, we consider there to be three different purposes for writing a piece: either to inform people of some particular information, to persuade people to agree with the author's point of view, or to entertain. It is totally possible that a particular writer might have more than one purpose. It's possible that you want to inform people and you want to entertain them at the same time. You can be informative but still amusing or engaging. But for the purposes of this essay, we're going to concentrate on a persuasive piece. Okay, now we're going to discuss what particular strategies are employed by a writer in constructing a valid persuasive argument. The first element that we need to talk about is whether or not they've defined their key terms clearly. This is one way for you to either accept or dismiss a persuasive argument if they've managed to define their terms clearly. In the reading that we had for this unit, defining terms clearly, one of the examples that the text uses is to talk about the term family values. So if an argument is based on the concept of family values, the writer would need to make it very clear what values are considered to be family values. If a writer does not make those values clear, if they're not defining that, then it's difficult, if not impossible, to respond to it in an informed way. The second way that we can evaluate a persuasive article, the second strategy would be whether or not the article uses information fairly. The information that they use in the article is evidence in support of their argument. So a writer chooses which pieces of information to include in their writing, and those pieces of evidence are supposed to support their argument. When you look at this evidence, according to the text that we've read, we need to ask ourselves if the information is accurate and up to date, and have they cited representative information? Are they presenting it fairly? Are they putting it in the light of which it actually occurred? Are they leaving out any evidence that would contradict what they're presenting, that would therefore negate what they're trying to argue? So basically, are they presenting all the information that you need to make an informed judgment and agree with their argument? Finally, we need to examine the different argumentation methods that you use and make sure that their argument is logical and that they're avoiding any logical fallacies, which we'll actually talk about in the next slide. It is something that is culturally based. Not every American is going to accept that. Many people might think that logic is logic wherever you are. However, constructing an argument in different cultures would require appealing to different viewpoints on logic. Basically, what you need to do as an American graduate student, whether or not you are American, is to familiarize yourself with strategies of logic so that you are familiar with how logic is created and based. Okay, we want to just quickly define some of the more common logical fallacies that you can use to invalidate an argument, things that you ought to be aware of when reading as a critical reader. Emotional appeals in and of themselves are not a logical fallacy. It's very common for a persuasive writer to use loaded words or words with emotional connotation, either positive or negative, depending upon whether they want you to agree with that point of view or disagree with it. When a writer only uses an emotional appeal, this would be a cause for invalidation. They're not basing their argument on logic, but on emotion alone. An ad hominem attack would be using an argument to attack a person or trying to invalidate another's argument by only attacking their character or reputation rather than the logic of their position. Post hoc ergo propter hoc, it was a faulty cause and effect. Simply because a second event occurs after the first does not mean the first was the cause. Either or reasoning, meaning that they're reducing an argument to two options. Usually situations are far more complex than this. A hasty generalization would be a conclusion that's drawn on too little evidence or from evidence that isn't representative of a particular situation. A false analogy would be creating an analogy between two things in which they are not analogous. In other words, there are too many differences to permit creating this analogy in the first place. Begging the question, or circular reason, is to assume as a fact the thesis that you're trying to prove. So basically, whatever you're trying to argue for, you're taking that as a given, and there is no argument present. Finally, an oversimplification. So basically, offering a solution to a problem that is far more complicated and requires a great deal more nuance than you are representing. So as we said before, when we write a critique, we take the critical reading of a text that we've evaluated and then put that evaluation in writing in order to further our own understanding and those of others. The things that we need to do, first of all, is summarize the text accurately. We need to give a fair shake to the article itself and summarize what the author has done. Then we need to answer two questions. Once we've determined what the purpose was, we need to assess how well the author accomplished that purpose. Did they achieve their goal? And then we need to move on to whether or not you as the reader agree or disagree with the author. Are there points that you agree with and others that you do not? Why do you disagree or agree with these particular points? This is the exploration of the text itself. And then finally, we need to state what our conclusions are about the passage. Is this text valid? Is the argument valid? Okay, information on Essay 2, which would include the prompt and the description of the structure of your essay and the formatting guidelines, are all available on the course website now. Because of the weather problems that we've been having recently and our impending spring break, I'm going to give you a 24-hour deadline extension. This was initially due on Sunday at 6 p.m., but I'm going to extend the deadline to Monday at 6 p.m. Monday will be March the 2nd. If you have questions about that, feel free to contact me via email. Hopefully I'll be seeing all of you later this week in our face-to-face meetings to talk about your first draft of Essay 1. Just a couple of notes for Essay 2 about paragraph structure and formatting. When we write a paragraph, first of all, paragraphs in MLA format need to be indented at the beginning of each paragraph. Just putting a space between paragraphs is not sufficient. You need to indent each paragraph. In addition, a paragraph is at least 5 sentences. A 2 or 3 sentence string is not a paragraph. So when you're having to write a response, just writing 2 sentences is not sufficient. You need to explore in more depth. Finally, formatting. Formatting is so important. I know many people don't realize that how important it can be, but as an academic, you are required to submit all of your writing in accordance with formatting guidelines. Now, that being said, someone might tell you, okay, I use MLA format, but there may also be in particular idiosyncrasies for a particular professor. Make sure that you pay attention and follow those guidelines, because those could be reasons for, if you're submitting a publication, to reject your publication submission. If you can't follow formatting guidelines, then obviously you don't want to be published. A professor can reject your assignment if you are not capable of following formatting guidelines. Why should I give you feedback on your paper if you can't follow the rules for the assignment or the submission? So please pay careful attention to the formatting guidelines. There were several people that had difficulty with formatting in the last essay. All right, that's all for today.